So I am Tim Huffman. I live in Anchorage, Alaska. I've been keeping bees since 2018. I'm the beekeeper for a local brewery. I practice and promote sustainable beekeeping, as in, um, uh, and the Alaska tradition is to kill your bees in the fall after harvest. And I'm trying to eliminate that abomination of beekeeping practice. Um, I get 80% of my colonies through winter, and I haven't bought bees in 5 years, so it's certainly doable. Okay, so let's see here. I am getting ready to share. Ah, it's giving me grief and it's on the wrong slide, so giving me a second.
While you're doing that,
There we go.
Tim, I just wanted to make sure I heard you right with your previous comment, and you said that the tradition in Alaska is to euthanize the hives,
Correct.
and
Or
then
just let them starve.
really,
Yeah.
huh,
Yeah. No, that's so historically in the old days, people did try to get them through winter in the pre-Varroa days, and they got about 50% of them through the winter. But what happened, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, was we essentially the beekeeping community, the folks that were active, the most active in the beekeeping community, just kind of came to believe you couldn't overwinter, and it's basically taught that overwintering is too hard. There's still people that teach their classes that way. They say you can't overwinter, kill them in the fall. This is how you do it. Cage the queen in the first week of July so that all your brood has emerged by the time you harvest honey, and that way you won't have any brood in the comb when you put it away for the winter. Yeah, so that's still common.
so they caged the queen. So what do they do with her?
They just
In
let her die.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
crazy.
because what they do is they when they after they harvest the honey, they want to be able to put their frames away for the winter.
Yeah, wow.
So, hey, Mad Hat.
You're on mute, Mad.
Hello, Tim. Yes, I'm here.
um,
Good to see you.
Good to see you. So, um, this was a very interesting presentation to put together because I've done it a bunch of times, but always for people from Alaska. And so when I was tailoring it for people that were not from Alaska, I kind of, I had to come up with some different angles, the right amount of Alaska specific information, and then the right way to kind of tie it together to present it in a way that would make sense to people in other areas. Although I don't know that any of it'll work for Dwayne in Arizona, but you know, that's all fine. So again, I'm Tim Huffman. My Facebook club is the Midnight Sun Sustainable Beekeeping Club. Oh, look, I didn't update that with our new name. We added sustainable to our name.
No,
And
stop.
my YouTube channel is Anchorage Backyard Beekeeping. When I started it, I had visions of posting lots of content and having fun, and I quickly realized posting content is a total pain in the butt. And so now it's mostly where I put all my classes so that the people who can't attend can still participate in the classes. And I have all those on there, plus a few fun videos. You know, people really like swarm captures and hiving up swarms and how to use a swarm bucket and stuff like that. My plan is to go kind of fast through this and save some time for questions at the end. And so if I'm going too fast, then just slow me down. I have a disclaimer first. I don't have all the answers. I've had success and I'm getting better. And I'm lucky I had good mentors and I did a lot of research. And I'm really stubborn about trying to find better ways to do things. I also change my methods all the time depending on what the last experience was. This is, I think, the important one. I overwinter outside. I know that people overwinter inside in climate controlled buildings, but that just doesn't make sense to me as a backyard beekeeper. To try to build a special facility that controls humidity and temperature just right. And don't get me wrong, if I was having a hard time overwintering outside, I would try that. But I have better success than the people I know that overwinter inside. You know, part of that is because they're just thinking, oh, I'll just put them in my garage and that satisfies all the requirements. Um, so I think it's a lot trickier than that. And I don't think it really makes sense for people to move colonies when they're at their heaviest after we've fed them up in the fall into a multi-use building, which is usually what it would be in Anchorage, a garage, or, you know, there are a few people who have built special facilities, but for the most part, uh, people are trying to do a facsimile of that and they're not getting their bees through the winter. And finally, I don't want to argue with people that do things differently. If people have had success, better success than me, then I just want to copy their methods. It doesn't make any sense to argue. I say that because a lot of what I've learned in keeping bees in Alaska is that some of the traditional knowledge is just not accurate. It's only accurate if you're not in Alaska, if you're somewhere down south. So, um, in many ways, beekeeping is the same in Alaska as anywhere else. We have the same seasonal cycles, the spring buildup, and then population peak in the middle of the summer, although I know your seasons are different in Arizona. Fall turnover to winter bees, and then winter survival is linked to strong, healthy population of winter bees. They still respond to environmental cues the same by increasing brood rearing when pollen and nectar are available. They swarm when the populations get high and the resources are abundant. They decrease or stop brood rearing during dearths, and this is one of the important ones, only healthy colonies survive winter. Uh, our climate is somewhat different than yours. I'm sure you've noticed. This is a quick chart on our average high temperatures. One of the things that cracks us up is when people say, don't even get into the hive unless it's 60 degrees. That would eliminate a lot of beekeeping in Alaska. You can see the highs across the top. Our average high is over 60 in June, July, and August. But in August, there's no pollen or nectar after the first week or two. So we really only have a couple of months where we have reasonable high temperatures. And although other people might consider 65 a little cool, for us, it's a hot summer day. I've learned to look at the low temperatures. And when those low temperatures get above 50, I know my colonies are going to take off. And so just a little different way to look at it. One of the other ways it's different is that our queens last longer. The brood rearing season is shorter. So I have no problem at all getting a queen through 2 years. I've had them go through 3 years. I've heard people talk about 4 years. Now, I know historically that was common, but it seems like in today's beekeeping, most people are trying to go into winter with brand new queens every year. I understand why. It's just that the season is so compressed. There's not as much laying. Whatever sperm they got on their mating flight seems to last longer. And I should check. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes,
Okay,
very
good.
good.
This is maybe the biggest difference. There are no feral colonies in Alaska. And I'm convinced it's because the lack of pollen and nectar between mid-August and mid-April is just too long for a colony to store enough resources to survive 7 months of winter. Now, my asterisk there is because this is me saying I'm convinced. I've had lots of people tell me that that conclusion is not based on data, and I would agree. It's only based on my experience and observation. And I'll change that conclusion if you show me a single feral colony in Alaska. And, you know, why else would they not make it? Really, that's it. Um, we have fewer swarms because of that, because there are no feral colonies that are swarming. The only colonies that swarm are managed colonies, and many people are managing to minimize swarming. So we don't get that many swarms. So swarm traps don't really work. I caught a swarm one time in a swarm trap. I know other people that tell the same story, and you hear far more stories of swarms just moving into vacant gear that's on a on a hive stand than you hear about swarm traps being effective. And one of the bad things, I hear stories all the time about people that have feral colonies that have developed some mite resistance, and they like to try to catch swarms from them, and that's not an option for us, um, which is unfortunate. We don't have any small hive beetles, we don't have wax moths, and we have less varroa mite buildup just because we have a shortened brood season. And we have a lot of bears. This is a black bear. We have a lot of brown bears, even in an urban place like Alaska. If you're on the outskirts of town, then brown bears are common. And every year I hear stories of people who a bear tore up their gear the week before they were going to put up their bear fence. So I try to encourage people to have that kind of thing ready before they get their bees. We cannot import nucleus colonies. It's illegal. We only have packages as a source of bees or ourselves, and they're all imported from California, and we do not have any local queen producers. So the implications for that are pretty profound. Um, we do have people that import packages, about 4,000 to 6,000 a year come to South Central Alaska, packages, and they do bring up a lot of queens and they bank them. But they run out at some point, and so a queen you get, if you really need a queen, there's often not a good source, or you may be getting a queen that's been banked for 5 or 6 weeks in a small colony and maybe longer. And I'm always suspicious of how well those queens hold up. We hear a lot of stories about queen rejection. Um, some of that might be in terms of the quality of the queens and the way they're stored. Um, some of it might be um, that inexperienced beekeepers think they're queenless when they're not. Or they wait too long and they're trying to introduce a queen to a laying worker hive and they kill them. But and some of that happens because they didn't have access to a queen right away and someone had to make a special order. One of the biggest differences for us, in my opinion, looking back, is that there's limited information and resources for Alaska beekeepers. Almost all research involves colonies in southern climates, where not only is the climate much warmer, but it allows them to use wood boxes, 3/4 inch thick, R value of less than 1, and that's sufficient. But what I know, and what's been reinforced through a lot of the work that Etienne Tardif and others have done more recently, is that colony behavior in the winter is dramatically different in a well-insulated hive than it is in a wood box. And here's 2 examples. I was always told that colonies heat the cluster, not the entire box. And I can tell you that's bunk. When they're in an insulated colony, an insulated hive, they heat the entire box. And there's plenty of really good data to show that. My bees keep the inside of the box between 60 and 65 degrees all winter long. The only time that drops is severe cold, below 10, and it starts to drop a little bit, and then below 0, it'll drop more. But I know they don't cluster. I can't open up the box and look. But if my temperature sensor on the top of that hive over in the corner says 65 degrees, and I know bees don't cluster until it's 55, I know they're not clustered. Here's another, which is that colonies, I was always taught that colonies prefer to tightly cluster during the winter. The middle of the cluster is 70 degrees, the outside is, I don't know, 42 or something like that. And they move in when they get cold and the oxygen content drops and which is all true. But what we know now is that that's only when they have to, when they're put in an emergency winter situation. My colonies don't cluster. As I said before, I can tell that through the temperature. I can tell you that the first time I went to feed to add some sugar to them in the winter in one year in February or March, I can't remember, but I had seen videos of people and they kind of lifted the lid off and there were those bees in this tight little cluster and they put some newspaper down, put some sugar on top of them and then closed them back up. Well, that was my intent. And I took the top off of my insulated hive and about 200 bees decided to try to kill me. And it's one of the few times I've ever had to run from bees. They weren't clustered at all in there. And now I've seen it again and again. They do not cluster until it's very, very cold. And again, as far as information, most books and YouTube channels involve beekeeping in warm climates. And while the information about colony development and um, biology, that is all applicable in days, but some of the methods that they teach um, are just a way to kill your colony in Alaska, certainly to slow them down. The main reason is because most of them don't worry about some heat loss because it's warm enough that the colony can compensate. But in our weather, heat is everything. And again, what's different about Alaska is this bad culture. You know, people um, stopped trying to get bees through the winter and stopped learning about more modern methods and gear. And it created this self-fulfilling cycle where new beekeepers bought gear that wasn't suited for overwintering. And by that, I mean wood boxes. They went to classes that didn't incorporate modern research. And they did their best. A lot of people tried to overwinter, but their colonies died. And after a few attempts, they convinced themselves that it just wasn't possible. And so they either stopped having bees or they started killing their bees. Um, I can tell you that despite my success, there's still a few folks up here who teach that you cannot get bees through winter and that anybody who tries is crazy. Um, and I personally don't think it's it should surprise you that some of those people sell packages. It's in their best interest to keep selling packages. And if you don't get your bees through the winter, then you're going to buy more packages. So, in a nutshell, my system is to shamelessly steal from anybody that successfully overwinters in northern climates. The person I've stolen the most from is Etienne Tardif. I am skeptical of generally accepted knowledge if it contradicts my own observations and experience. I'll give you an example. Randy Oliver was just up here, and he stated quite confidently that bees are always raising brood all winter. And I said, not my bees. He goes, well, how do you know? I said, well, I've got a temperature sensor in my hive. He goes, well, unless you had the temperature sensor right in the middle of that cluster, you wouldn't know it. I go, no, you would, because if I have a constant 60 to 65 degrees at the top, which is where the heat is going to rise to, if they start rearing brood somewhere, that 90 degrees that they're keeping the brood at, 92, 96, you know, that's going to raise the temperature at the top of the hive because heat rises. And he kind of went, our bees, our colonies don't raise brood all winter, none of it. And I've never had brood well, until last year, I'd never had brood in a colony that died. Um, that's sort of a caveat for later. I also came to understand that beekeeping in Alaska is exactly the same as beekeeping everywhere else, except when it's different. And really, when it's different is that shortened season, but long winter, and the need to maximize heat retention. I also try to keep learning. I try to stay on top of new information and adjust my methods accordingly. So what I do, and this is going to sound odd to people that are not Alaska, is I teach people to focus on beekeeping, not honey production. One of the byproducts of not trying to get bees through the winter up here is the vast majority of Alaska beekeepers didn't know anything about colony health. If you're going to kill your bees in August, you don't really need to learn anything about varroa mites. One well-known beekeeper would say things like, you don't have to worry about varroa mites the first year. Like no treatment at all. You don't even have to worry about it. And I would say, well, that's true if you don't care if your bees die either in April or May, or they just fail to thrive and die the next July with no honey, because that's what's going to happen if you ignore varroa mites. So I try to train people to use modern geared methods, which I'll talk about in a little bit, understand colony behavior like all beekeepers do, and that they'll get plenty of honey. I mean, I would keep bees even if I didn't get honey, but I get as much or more honey than anybody else. And a big reason for that is because I have large colonies coming out of winter, well-established, proven queens, And there's an early season flow that my colonies take advantage of, but the packages are still building up. They can't store it with the same capacity that my colonies can. So focusing on beekeeping will get you honey, but focusing on honey production will often cost you overwintering. And really, I don't know if it's obvious to people that aren't in Alaska, but really what that means is um, just ignoring colony health and trying to squeeze every last drop of honey out of them, waiting too long to pull your honey when we're in a dearth, so the queen has already shut down. But I'll talk about that again. And as you knew this was coming, we had to keep them warm. Bees need heat for everything. They need heat to raise brood. They need heat to draw wax. They need heat to distribute propolis. And in warmer temperatures, they can reduce the moisture in honey more efficiently. So, and the beauty of it is they create their own heat. We just have to use the kind of gear and methods that retain that heat. That's other than colony health, that's the main thing that people do wrong here. So how do I keep them warm? I have polystyrene hives, R value of about 7, and I add extra insulation in the winter. And I should also add that I'm in Anchorage, which is fairly moderate by Alaska standards in terms of the temperature. In Fairbanks, we can get below zero weather, but Fairbanks can get minus 40. Um, and Yukon territories, where Etienne is, can have 6 weeks in a row of minus 40. So the main variable here that you can control for is minimizing heat retention by adding insulation, especially above. Especially above. It's just like your house. Your house loses what, 70% of its heat through the ceiling, through the roof. That's why you have more insulation over your heads in the ceiling than you do in the walls. And the same exact thing uh, with colonies. I guess I should add, um, this sounds counterintuitive to many that aren't in Alaska, but my well-insulated colonies hardly eat anything, even though they don't cluster. They're not running around burning calories. They're not raising brood, which takes a lot of calories. They're not foraging, which takes a lot of calories. They're just hanging out in the hive. They're crawling around. And people often say they'll run out of food if they're too active. It's the opposite. My colonies go through about 25 to 30 pounds of food all winter in a long winter, in a long winter. And that's because they're not having to work hard to heat the colony. Um, and they also have lower winter mortality because they don't have the same kind of metabolic fatigue that's required when there's constant heating. Um, this is I use this graphic for people in Alaska because they say, well, when do I need insulation? And so I say, how many days in the summer is it above 90, which is brood nest temperature, uh, more or less? And the answer, of course, is one maybe in Fairbanks, but nowhere else. And in the fall, spring, or winter, when the temperature, how many days do we have above 55 or above 55, I should say? And we don't have any. So really, year-round insulation helps. Now, colonies can get by in wood in the summer, but where it really starts to show is the shoulder seasons and the winter. I would say fewer than 10% of people who try to overwinter in wood alone have success. Whereas if they add external insulation to wood hives or use another insulation strategy, that number bumps up over 50. Um, I also use Reflectix for inner covers. Um, One of the things that works in the lower 48, you can put a wooden inner cover on there and they'll seal the gaps with propolis. They don't do that up here when the weather's cold. That's what really gave me an appreciation for the need for heat, for the ability to both collect and distribute propolis. I went back, I was looking at pictures of my colonies from my very first year beekeeping, and I took a ton of pictures. And one of the things that struck me as odd is how nice and white, perfect white, the top of my polystyrene box was staying. And, uh, and that shouldn't have happened. There should have been a line of propolis around the edge where the wooden inner cover was on. And I look back through the pictures, that package was installed in mid-April. It was the third week of May before there was any propolis at all that was deposited around that inner cover when the temperatures got warm enough for them to do that. And so that means, and I don't know if anybody here has ever done it, but if you put an inner cover on a box and put a light inside the box, you can see a thin line of light all the way around. There's a couple of pressure points where you can't see it, but it's basically leaking heat constantly until they seal it up. And every time you pop it off, they're going to have that same thing. So what the Reflectix does is it forms a gasket. They don't need to propolize it. When I put another box on top of that Reflectix, it forms a perfect gasket, doesn't let any heat out. So I don't use it because it adds insulation. I use it because it prevents heat loss through the gaps between that box and my top box, which in the spring has a feeder. I only use a lower entrance. Upper entrances leak heat, and that's not something I just can't afford to have my colony work harder to heat the hive. I only use hive top feeders and over the hole in the inner cover. That way, if it does get really cold, then the colony can feed without breaking cluster. Um, we have people here try to use Boardman feeders, entrance feeders. Here because they saw YouTube from the South where they did that, and their colonies starve. It's too cold in the spring. It's just too cold in the spring, and the syrup has to be 50 degrees anyway. If you put it above the inner cover, then the heat the colony is generating keeps it above 50. If you put it outside, it's going to be 40 degrees in the morning or 38 degrees in the morning. They're not going to be able to consume it till it warms up. Reducing the entrances. And I match the space to the population. It's very important. Year round, I'm adjusting how many boxes I've got, how many frames are in those boxes. I use follower boards to shrink them to a smaller size. And just trying to make sure that I don't grow the space inside the box until the colony population can support it. And obviously, this is true for everywhere, making inspections brief and only when necessary. So I also learned about keeping bees healthy when all my bees died my second year from varroa mite infestation and the um, viruses that they vector. This is nothing new to anybody who keeps bees. So varroa and nutrition are really important. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but um, it's the number one reason colonies don't survive, whether you're in Alaska or anywhere. I get a lot of people who say, "Oh, I'm not worried about varroa mites. Alaska's too far north for them." To which my response is, well, you got your bees from California. Is it too far north for them in California? They just don't understand that the temperature inside the hive is plenty warm enough for varroa to multiply and destroy your hive. Um, but my take on varroa is slightly different from Alaska, which is the number one problem that mites and the viruses that they vector present is that they shorten the lives of bees. So that manifests itself in most situations as they can't age into their colony responsibilities properly, whether it's feeding brood or whether it's foraging. All that gets condensed. They can't live long enough to perpetuate the cycle to allow the colony to grow. But where it really shows itself is for the lifespan of winter bees. My winter bees are all emerged by October. And my queens won't start laying till April 1st-ish, whenever I put the first pollen patty in there. So I can't afford for the life expectancy of my winter bees to be shortened at all. I need them to live about 270 days or more to live long enough to get that next summer's population built up high enough to be able to go. So that's the main thing, shortened lives. Um, I, as from a nutritional perspective, there's no pollen available until mid-April at the earliest, and then it's too cold a lot of the times for my bees to forage for it. And so I start feeding. I supplement with pollen patties that have real pollen in them. I do that in April and I do it again in the fall. I'm trying to squeeze an extra round of brood before they would normally start raising it, and an extra round afterwards. And really what I'm doing is I'm trying to make it so my winter bees don't have to live quite as long to be able to get that next round of that next uh, population cycle going. In Alaska, um, as I said, there's no pollen after mid-August, but there's often decreasing. The nectar flow is often over at the end of July. And if people don't harvest their honey on time, then what happens is the colony thinks it's in a dearth, which is, and the queens shut down right when we need them to be laying up giving a lot to give us a strong winter population. So harvesting honey on time is really the first, at the latest, the second week of August, sometime in the second week, and then starting to feed right away because we don't want the colony to think they've gone into dearth. Um, Another common saying or common knowledge is that feeding 1-to-1 syrup in the spring for brood production and feeding 2-to-1 syrup in the fall for winter stores, which is correct. It's just that when we have to start feeding in August, we don't want them to store for winter yet. We want them to raise brood. We want them to raise another month at least worth of brood. So after I remove the honey, I feed 1-to-1 syrup to promote brood production. I switch um, towards the end of August to a 2-to-1 ratio because then they won't have to reduce it as much. And then they are in winter storage. Most of the winter bees have been laid and they're going to fill up around that brood nest. Um, and and this is a really important part. Stop feeding completely by early to mid-September. The temperatures are dropping significantly by then, and I want to have all that syrup capped before the colder weather, excuse me, before the colder weather arrives. Um, as you know, capped syrup is hygroscopic. It absorbs water. Uncapped is whatever the opposite of that is. But it puts moisture into the hive. So we want it all capped before it gets cold. Another important principle is to condense, and I have to add when possible. Now, uh, a common misconception in Alaska, maybe elsewhere, I don't know, I haven't kept bees in other places, is that you have a colony that's so big it can't be condensed because they filled 2 full deeps in July. But colony population is decreasing so fast, they're going to lose something on the order of 50% of their population in the next several months. And so thinking ahead to what the size is going to be is very important. So I remove extra boxes when I can, and I reduce the space inside by removing frames, outside frames, and putting foam follower boards. What people ask me, um, what number of boxes to go into winter with, and the answer is as many as you need. Hi, Randy.
Hey, Tim.
And uh, and um, And so they asked me, well, how many do they need? And so what I tell them is you tilt the box backward from the bottom. You guys have probably all done this, and you look at the population from below. What I want to see is 10 full frames of bees, um, and another half an inch or inch of bees festooning below that, and another quarter inch to a half an inch of bees crawling on the bottom board. That's a full box. If I have less than that, I take some frames out. Now, bear in mind, this is in August, and I'm not going to open them again after mid-August. It's getting too cold. And also there's nothing I can do about it anyway. If I have a colony that goes queenless in late August, they're done. I can't introduce a queen in late August where I am. It's basically winter. Um, so I want to see it jam packed with bees. And so I have people in my Facebook page and they'll tilt it back and take a picture and they'll say, should I condense? And I'll go, well, you're looking at the same picture I am. How many frames of bees do you have? And they'll say, you have 8 frames of bees, you're going to have less than that. You're going to have 5 frames of bees in 2 months. You want them to have all that space to heat, all that space to have to manage humidity. So condensing in August is when we do it. It's still going to shrink, but we've managed it to some degree. And this should be no surprise to you guys. Make splits, get local queens, and go into winter with extra colonies. And if you want to be sustainable, you can't go into, if you want 10 colonies, you can't go into winter with 10 colonies. You have to go into winter with more. And again, just the history here was such that um, people just bought new colonies in the spring and didn't think anything about it. So there's lots of research on locally mated queens being superior to commercial queens. There are enough bees in most Alaska communities for successful local queen mating. It's pretty easy to do. The colony does the work. They make the extra queen. You just have to set them up for it. I prefer to do queen right splits, but I've also done walkaway splits. It works great as swarm prevention. One of the unfortunate parts about being in Alaska is any swarm you don't capture is dead. They're not going to find a hollow tree and make it through and live through the winter. It's just not going to happen. Plus, we don't have great trees for that either. What they're going to do is move into your neighbor's eaves, and then they're going to have to pay to have somebody remove them, or they're going to poison them. So really minimizing swarming is really important to Alaska beekeeping. And doing splits, reducing the size a little bit, and especially a queen right split. Once you remove that queen and a few frames of brood, that colony is not going to swarm. If they don't make a new queen, the original colony just recombine. And then yeah, I just talk to people in my group. I just say you can, if you do get a new queen, then you can either give away or sell the original queen, or you can go into winter with an extra colony, which is insurance. So here's my winter setup. And first, my winter setup disclaimer. If you're already getting 80% through the winter, ignore me. You've got it figured out. You don't need to listen to anything I say. But this is the bigger one. The gear setup is irrelevant if your colony is sick or your colony is too small for the space. You got 5 frames of bees in a 10-frame box. They're not going to make it here. Winter's too long. It's too hard for them to heat all winter. Or if your winter prep was late or insufficient. And by that, I mean, if you harvested your honey in the first week of August and you didn't start feeding until the last week of August, or you kept feeding into October, all those are recipes for disaster. You'll have a queen that shut down, or you'll have too much uncapped food. They won't be able to cap it before it gets cold, and so the moisture problems become profound. So this is a picture of a couple of nukes and one large colony that shows what my winter setup is. And I'm going to show a quick video after this, but I use, and again, there's many ways to do this, but this is just my setup. I use a screen bottom board over a solid surface. I use polystyrene box and I tape the seams with Tyvek tape to make sure there are no micro leaking. And 2 years ago, I started using a reflective shell. I really like that for a couple of reasons. And I wrap it around and I tape the top so that any air between the side of the box and the reflectix is trapped. The warm air can't escape. And it has a little flap on the bottom that extends over the landing board. That prevents snow and ice buildup there. It works really great. If you use an entrance reducer, like a wooden entrance reducer in Alaska, it'll get frozen in place. You can't move it out. You can't, if you have some bees die, some mortality, it's really hard to get it out of the way without a big crack. And then the bees are going to come out, and any bee that comes out most of the winter is going to die because the temperature is so cold. So you can see the tape on the front is just me giving the front of those hives a slightly different look. I saw this cool video once of this building. It was one of the universities. It had a bunch of beehives that accessed through a wall, and they had a different geometric design by each entrance. You're just giving the bees something to orient to. So rather than it's just shiny, plain reflectix, I give them a little different pattern to orient to find their way home. I don't know if it works or not, but that's the thing. So I want to show a quick video of me checking my bees, and you'll get a better feel for how this looks on the inside. Um, Give me a second. I think. All right. So uh, uh, can you guys all see that? Can I get some feedback to make sure the screen share was successful?
Yeah, I can see it, Tim.
Okay, thanks. So this is my typical winter setup. I'm going in to winter. If you're curious about the duct tape on the sides, a bear, a bear bit the side but didn't tear it up, and I just put some duct tape on the outside to hold it in place until the next summer when I could repair it. But I have these two brood boxes. I've got a Reflectix inner cover on, and what I'm going to do is put on a top box that has emergency winter food, which is sugar, and extra insulation. Um, the and I'm and this is October. I can't add the sugar until sometime in October, or they will haul out the sugar as trash. I learned that lesson the hard way.
Okay, Stan Gore, this is for you.
Oh, let me just say, Stan Gore is another beekeeper friend of mine, lives in Texas, and he asked me to do a video for them on how I set up for winter.
Ask me how I winterize my bees, and this is how I do it. Now I don't use a wooden inner cover anymore. I only use Reflectix. I've got a square there for feeding. I put a piece of plexiglass here when I get finished in the fall, so that when I come back and add the candy board later, they haven't hauled it all away as trash. And now it's October, it's time to add the candy. So what I'll do, I have a piece of screen that the bees can crawl through, piece of paper on it, to slow them down, and I will just slide this forward slowly, and the bees get out of the way. And I'll take my plexiglass off. And now I can install my candy board, which I make as an insert. Now, this is one piece of candy that I actually make, but that's only to hold down the paper. Now what I'll do is I've taken a piece of 1x foam, and this is form fit in here to create an insert. I don't want any wood to be exposed to the outside and leak cold. So I have this 1x foam insert that goes down on the outside like that. And I'll pour my sugar around the outside. And I don't add a ton of sugar. I can always come back and add more if they need it. This is emergency food. If they run out in the winter, and they're gonna have a long winter here in Alaska. Next, and look at my favorite part of this. Look at this from straight above, Fred. I put another piece of Reflectix over the top that has another piece of plexiglass in it. So I can come and look in the wintertime and see if those bees are up on the candy, and if so, how much they've eaten. Finally, I add 2 inches of foam, slide it in, and then put the lid on my poly box. So I have 3 inches of insulation on top. That'll do it.
And now, what I want to do is show you what it looks like when I check in the winter. So you can see as I'm taking apart what I just put together. This is a February day. It's about 21 degrees outside.
Idiot editing. Right. There we go. So I can see some bees in there. And looks great. Look great.
So as you can see, external temperature was 21 degrees. those bees were not clustered. They were active. They were moving around. They were just starting on the sugar. Now I add the sugar for the exceptions. Only about 20% of my colonies eat any significant amount of sugar, but those 20% would die if I didn't have that in there. And my favorite kind of bee is a bee that's alive in April. So it's just insurance for those 20%. I have changed the design of my candy board insert. I now have a narrower space. Um, so I'm not putting as much sugar in there. The other thing this allows me to do that setup is when I go to put a pollen patty in there, I don't have to take the hive apart, remove the inner cover. I just lay the pollen patty right over the hole in the inner cover and they consume it. And I can tell from my temperature sensors the day after, 2 days after at the most, I add the pollen patty in early April. Temperature spikes up to 90 and they start rearing brood just like clockwork. That is the presentation.
Wow, that was awesome, Tim. Thank you very much. We have a few questions, but I wanted to kind of start off with a couple of questions that occurred to me when you were talking. So you showed the scale of your or the average temperatures through the course of a year. So it's a lot like what I have temperature wise in Southwest Montana. You know, it's almost exactly like that.
Mhm.
So having said that, what sort of mite treatment regimen do you have during the year with temperatures like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Believe it or not, most years I only treat once. Um, I treat in October after all the winter brood has emerged, and I count the mites to estimate, it lets me know what the population was. So this year I did splits all at the same time, and I fully intended to do a summer treatment 24 days after I had removed the original queen, because by then all of her brood has emerged, and the brood from the new queen isn't capped yet. And then I had some health issues that kept me from following up on it. So what I'm saying is what I do and what ideally I want to do. I would love to treat twice a year, once during a planned brood break and once in the fall after all winter brood has emerged. I will say this, that I pretty aggressively drone call. Um, I keep 3 to 4 drone frames in my colony, 2 brood boxes. So one in one box, 2 in the other. Usually I think that's about 15%. So usually approximates what the drone population is. And I always have extras. And anytime I'm doing an inspection and a drone frame is capped, I pull it and replace it. And that last year I did not treat um, during the summer. I, I think it was just my own disorganization that kept me from getting to it. But I can tell you that my mite drop count in October, they were all under 200.
Yeah.
So if I'm getting 90+% of the mites, that tells you that that drone culling just knocked the heck out of it prevented the mite population from growing pretty amazingly.
Yeah, so what do you use for your mite treatments?
Oh, oxalic acid vapor. Absolutely.
That's it?
Yeah, and the reason I don't use the synthetics because I don't like the idea of them persisting in wax or honey. And I don't use formic because everybody that I've read about that uses it talks about it induces a brood break. And I don't really have a long enough season to survive a brood break, I don't think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, great. So another question before we launch into the Q&A is in terms of ventilation. So you have, it looks like a 1 or 2 inch opening based on the size of the hive, if I heard that right. Now through the winter months, um, do you have any ventilation above the colony, or is it just the entrance?
None. Yeah, and my entrances, my winter entrance on a large hive will be 4 inches, and on a small hive they'll be 2. My nukes are 2 inches,
Yeah.
and you can't vent above the roof without venting heat. And when you vent heat, then your colony has to work harder to make more heat. You're sucking cold air into the hive, and and that means they have to eat more because they're working hard. And when they eat more, they're actually respirating out more moisture. I mean, that's the only source of moisture in the hive in the wintertime is well, if all the uh, syrup or honey is capped, is their respiration. So I can tell you that there's I'm convinced that moisture problems that are the result of improper, what, two things, improper insulation or insufficient insulation, I should just say. Um, so that because in my colony that's insulated, it's 60 to 65 degrees on the top. The coldest surface is never the top. It's always on the sides. And if it condenses on the sides, it drips down through the screen inner cover, down onto the hive stand, and doesn't hurt anything. But I also have seen that when a colony was too small for the space they had. And in those cases, um, they kept the area above them heated, but there's a broader area around the edges where you had condensation. I've had a plexiglass inner cover before where I could see that just above the cluster. It's perfectly dry and around the edges it dripped. So the smaller the cluster, the bigger the area of condensation around the outside. And that moisture can drip down on the frames to create all kinds of mold problems.
Yeah, we had a mini conference 2 or 3 months ago from Dr. Dednam from the University of Montana, and he's studying the thermodynamics in a hive, and that was his experience as well, just exactly what you described. And it was kind of a revelation to us here in Montana because we've always believed that you had to have an upper entrance to kind of manage the humidity and also allow the bees a place to go out and cleanse if they want to. And he debunked that one pretty fast.
I can I can tell you that the humidity sensors that I've had in there always have humidity in the 90s. It's always way too humid. I've
Right.
just come to disregard them. I can also tell you that up there in my candy board, there is moisture in there. It turns that sugar into hard candy. And it's a rock by the time spring comes. And it's really wet in there too. I mean, it's up there, there's moisture from condensation around the edges, but I'm convinced the bees are just using that moisture. And it doesn't get down to the hive because the only way to get through is that hole in the inner cover, and it's never condensing there. It's around the edges.
Yeah, amazing. Well, what a great presentation. Thank you. Let's jump into I could sit here and ask you questions all day long, but let's get to some of the attendees' questions. The first one, Tim, is reflective insulation facing which way?
Oh, is that like a trick question? It's
No,
the same on both sides. I guess I'm confused by what they mean by which way it faces, because this foil bubble wrap Reflectix, it's identical on both sides.
yeah, there are some products
Oh,
out there reflective that's only reflective on one side, and
I see. Well, bear in mind, I'm using it. It does add a little insulation, sure, but I'm using it as an inner cover to make a gasket more than to add insulation.
got it.
All right. And on
Yeah.
the outside, that's a good question. If I don't know which way, I guess I'd face it inside if I was doing it for the external wrap, because you would want to reflect the heat back into the middle. But I don't know. I haven't used a product that worked like that.
Yeah, and I'm guessing a lot of your outside wraps are for insulation value, but also for wind management, right?
Yeah, you can see the picture behind me. I have bees up on a warehouse roof, and they get regularly winds, 60 to 80 big north winds off of Kinnick Arm. It's not a very hospitable place in the winter up there. You can also see in this particular case, I have extra foam insulation wrap on 3 sides. That's all wind. That's all wind protection from that
Yeah.
angle.
Well, okay, great. Let's go to the next one then. It said, how much honey do you typically harvest per colony per year? How much honey do you leave in the bees for the winter?
People always want to know that. I probably, uh, well, I got, and it's probably like, depending on the year, 30 to 50 pounds a hive. It's a range in that ballpark. But bear in mind how short our season is. And also look at where these bees are. I mean, what you can't see behind you is there's this there's a creek basin. It's all industrial. There's no real habitat there. And there's downtown Anchorage on one side. And on another side, there's Cook Inlet. So it's if you were going to try to get honey, this is not where you would put your hives. So these are urban bees. They're urban foraging on all the exotics in people's yards and the landscaping stuff that the city puts in. So yeah, I got about 35 pounds of honey, 6 colonies. The people I work for that I have bees up there for would like me to expand, and I said I think I'd get the same amount of honey out of 12 colonies that I'd get out of 6. There's just not that much there. But I can tell you that people in the valley, just as an Alaska thing, they more than double what I'm doing because they have better habitat, a lot more flowers. But we don't get anything like, I know down south I hear people getting like 120, 100, nothing like that in Alaska. I think 60 or 75 pounds is probably about the max under most conditions.
You don't have a lot of agriculture there, do you, in your area?
Well, in the Matsu Valley, there's quite a bit of agriculture, but not on a scale that you guys would think of as agricultural.
Great. So Dom has another question. He wanted to know what type of bees do you keep? But like Italians, Russians, or
Well, anything but Italians. Italians just, I'd always heard this and then I experienced it myself. They try to brood up too early and it killed them this summer or this winter, last winter. I had 15 colonies. I had 12 make it through. The 3 that didn't make it through were all Italians. Um, One of them died in December when they starved to death. They went through all I never even check sugar usually until mid January. On a whim, I checked the sugar of this one colony. They had eaten all of their syrup, all their stored syrup, and every grain of sugar by uh, the first week of December. I added, I don't know, 3 or 4 pounds more of sugar. I went back 2 weeks later. They had consumed all of that and starved.
wow.
I've never had that happen. One of the other colonies started trying to raise brood in February. And it's the only colony, I think I said before, they don't raise brood in the winter here. It's the only colony I've ever had that tried to raise brood in the winter. And as a dead out, I found 2 or 3 frames of brood capped, and they just tapped themselves out trying to do it during extreme situation and no resources. So maybe I could figure out a way to add pollen patties in winter. I don't know. I'm not going to try it again because the you, it's really not practical to have a strategy that requires you to open up a hive and manage it when the average temperature is under 30.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the answer is I started with Russians and I've had Carnies and Caucasians, and all of mine are mutts now because they're mating locally. So
Yeah. So we have a kind of an interesting question that I wondered about too, and it's what kind of plants do you have there, and
mm,
what is your major source of honey from?
well, so willow is the first, and it has a surprising amount of pollen and nectar. Look at a catkin sometime closely and see all those little flowers inside the female catkin. It's pretty cool. I never noticed until I had bees. So that's first. Dandelions are second. Dandelions are huge for us. And then as the dandelions finish, you get all these the local the exotics that aren't native to Alaska, fruit trees, all kinds of various flowers that people plant. And then as the summer progresses, we get white clover and sweet clover and whatever the other clover is, clover, a lot of clover,
Right.
rose, and at the end of the season, fireweed. Although fireweed is very fickle, it requires just the right amount of heat and uh, humidity, and often you'll have a field full of fireweed and you'll walk through it and there won't be a bee on it. It's just conditions aren't quite right. And then they'll change a little bit and they'll just swarm all over it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's it primarily.
Good. So another question is what brand of bee sensors do you use in your hives and why?
I use Broodminder, and like much of the equipment I use Broodminder because that's the thing I tried first, not because I did research and decided it was the best. Um, I um, I have some handy, just for anybody who's thinking about using them. That long, oh, can I get it? Yeah. The filter was making it go away. That long tail I cut off. It doesn't serve any purpose. And I just tuck it. Usually, what I do is I install them in October, and I kind of tuck it, reach sideways through that hole in the inner cover and underneath it, and stick it in there. And they seem to work pretty well. I like being able to Bluetooth the information to my phone. Um, I like bees. I'm addicted to bees, and um, I like going and going hive to hive and seeing 65, 65, 60, 65 degrees. It just lets me know. And I also like, as you saw that the short video, it just does my heart good to be able to pop that top in the winter and look at the bees and not disturb them, but see live bees, strong cluster. Yeah, I love being able to do that.
That's great. So the sensor gives you feedback on their temperature. Is there any other sort of feedback you get from that sensor?
The humidity, but I ignore it because it always says it's way too high and my bees make it through winter. So
Yeah, not useful.
and it might be just me talking from a position of ignorance. I can't control the humidity in there, so I pay less attention to what the ideal um, humidity would be. Um, if I mean, I know people vent to manage humidity, but I'm not going to do that because the corresponding loss of heat is going to create other problems. So
Yeah,
if my bees were dying and I thought it was humidity related, I would delve into it a lot more.
yeah, that makes sense. We had a question from Joan who said there must be massive nosema problems with that humidity level.
I've never had nosema problems that I know of. So um, I mean, we have a member of our club who is an entomologist and talk to her bosses, and she'll do testing of our bees. And if I had a colony that I thought was sick from something in a way that made me concerned about nosema, then I would send her a sample and she would let me know what the count was. I've just never done that. Um, so I don't know. Maybe somebody smarter than me can tell me if there's a correlation between high humidity and nosema.
Yeah, I'm going to punt that one maybe to Randy or MedHat and see if they could
Not
add
that
some
I've
light.
heard of. There's a strong correlation with pollen income. When you have pollen coming in, your nosema counts go way up. When there's not much pollen, they go way down. And at least in Canada, there's nosema ceranae does not seem to be an issue during the winter. Now, as far as you seeing signs of nosema, what would be the signs of nosema you'd look for?
Well, that's part of me saying I've never looked for it because I've never had problems with it. If I had problems, I'll say it a different way. If I ever had problems, if I ever had problems with symptoms that confused me, then
What symptom would you look for?
well, basically failure to thrive or dying bees. Like if I had up here, the concern is always over winter, and they go, "Oh, I think my bees died from nosema," and so, but I never have thought that was the reason my colonies didn't survive.
Uh-huh.
So, frankly, most of the people up here that talk about nosema doesn't really make any sense to me. That I feel like they're worried. I feel like they're misunderstanding what's going on in their colonies.
Without a microscope, you shouldn't even talk about it.
Well,
The only symptom you're going to see would be slow spring buildup. Okay,
you
so
know,
just be slow buildup. You wouldn't see dead bees, you just see slow buildup. So, and I'm not saying you have nosema problem at all, but I'm just saying when you say you don't see any signs, I was really curious what the hell signs you were looking for.
Well, yeah. Well, I wasn't looking, which right. So yeah, we do. I am trying to get us myself smarter and my club smarter about it. And so next year we do have this arrangements to get it tested. And so uh, I think that we'll look for specifically as a slow spring buildup. There was one beekeeper up here who did get some bees tested. His were all package bees. It was one of those years California had a really, I don't know if it's related or not, but they had a really wet spring, really cold and wet spring, and he felt like a lot of colonies came up sick, and he had sent some tested, and they showed really high nosema counts. Um, Part of the reason why I'm immune to that is I'm not getting those packages anymore, and I just haven't really seen a problem with my bees building up in the spring. So.
Yeah, you would know it if you saw it, right? I think. So, yeah, good conversation. So we had another question, Tim. I think you've addressed it a couple of times, but maybe one more time is how much honey do you leave in the hive for the winter?
Oh, uh, not much. I figure I have an agreement with the bees. I take their honey and I give them syrup, and I think they do just fine overwintering on syrup. So I don't intentionally leave any honey. I don't go through frame by frame and harvest as much as I can from the brood nest. But during the summer, when they're backfilling the brood nest, which happens a lot, when the flow is on and they're harvesting or they're foraging 16 or 18 hours a day, I mean, they'll backfill those bottom boxes like nobody's business. And so I'll go in once a week. And if they've got a frame that's all pollen down, or excuse me, that's all nectar down in the brood box, I'll pull it up and put it in a super. One of the advantages I have, I use all mediums, so every frame fits every box. So I am opening up the brood nest and increasing my honey flow by pulling frames of nectar out of the brood nest and putting them in a super. So I do that during the season, and then by the time I harvest honey, I'm just harvesting everything above the queen excluder. They get whatever's below, but most of that is brood and pollen. So that's one of the reasons why I have to start feeding right away. I'm not leaving them any honey.
That's interesting. Yeah, I noticed in one of your photos that you had two shallow supers and then one on top of the other. If I saw that right,
They're mediums.
they're mediums. Okay.
Mhm.
All right, got it.
Yeah, most of my colonies winter in two mediums.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. Well, that's all the questions we had, Tim. What a great presentation. Thank you. Thanks for taking the time and just acknowledge you a little further, Tim. You're on the board of WAS now, and we've enjoyed having you in one meeting so far, but it's been very helpful. So thank you for participating in the society at that level. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Any other last minute questions from anybody or comments? If not, we'll stop.
Just going to tell Randy, today was the first day without a crutch.
Awesome. Well, we're happy you're up and around, dude.
Yes, wonderful.
Yeah,
Hey,
Randy was here
Tim.
when I just couldn't
Oh,
even
yeah.
Tim,
Whew.
Smith here.
Yeah.
You might give the group like how many beekeepers in your club? Like last February when I was up there, I was quite impressive. Like it's not one or two or 10 or
Right.
15. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
no.
that's
Yeah.
yeah,
Our club had 140 paid members this year,
yes.
and the Facebook page has going on 2,000 members.
Yeah.
So
And that's a lot of guys they think Alaska, oh, maybe one or two beekeepers just playing around some bees, but it's quite impressive to see that group
Yeah.
growing and they work so hard and they like get any information can help them out to keep the bees alive, and that's a real good thing for the bees and for the
Yeah,
environment up there.
exactly.
yeah, I surveyed our members, had quite a good response, and over 70% got colonies through winter last year. So that would have been unheard of 6 years ago.
Mhm.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, you're
No,
doing good.
yeah. It's, thanks for sharing this information because again, with this extreme climate up there, like what we have also up in our part of the world, it still be people can keep the bees alive and carry on. That's it all depends on the management. That's all.
Yeah, we got a note in from somebody from Central California that says, "Good job, Tim, that you get more bees through the winter than they do, and they don't have winter."
Well, yeah, but I know like there's a trade-off, right? I also don't have as long of a row rearing season.
Mhm.
Oh, I mean brood rearing season.
It's true.
Right.
So yeah, so I know that there's some trade-offs in there that make it easier up here. If I had to deal with small hive beetles, I would just have to. There'd be so much more I'd have to learn. So
You know, we had another last minute question come in too, which no one has really said yet, and that is, what do you have any issues with chalk brood?
never.
Yeah.
Now and that's I just have never seen it. And what I don't know is if this is where I hope as a club, one of the things I try to get, ideally every beekeeper would have a mentor, but that's not really possible. And so what I'm hoping is that my Facebook group is this proxy mentor. And one of the things I encourage people to do is take pictures of things that they, when they're doing inspection, if it looks unusual and post it so they can get feedback. So what I don't know is if there's the only pictures I've seen of purported chalk brood turned out to be molded bee bread from the year before. So
Huh.
all white, it turns white and moldy, and they go, "Oh, look, this looks like the chalk brood pictures." Like,
No.
I don't think so. So I know that as things get warmer and more people keep their bees over winter, we're likely to experience some of these other problems. I wouldn't know European foul brood if it bit me in the butt.
Well, you're
So,
lucky. Yeah.
well, I think that's exactly right. And so I think um, the more successful, the more people are keeping bees year round, the more likely we are to see that and have to deal with it. So I know that I got a lot of learning to go.
The fewer
Wow.
bees that you bring in from elsewhere, the less chance you have of getting new variants of anything coming in. So it's not like chalk brood or European foul brood are one organism. They have variants, and some of the variants are more virulent. And so when if you happen to get that, your bees will suffer for maybe about 3 years, then it disappears. And it's just the bees build up immune response to that variant.
Huh. Someone just asked too, Tim, what you have polystyrene boxes. Um, and where do you source those from?
Well, like that's another one of those categories where I use Bmax boxes for the sole reason of that's what I started with, and so those boxes all fit each other. And I have a friend who runs a nutritional supplement slash beekeeping supply store. I get mine through him. Um, so for my 6 frame nukes, I like the Superior nukes, but they become impossibly expensive. I'm actually, after a couple long conversations with Randy this summer, I want to start trying to use wood hives with some other kind of insulation. And I want to try to figure that out. I think of polystyrene as helping me keep bees sustainably, but uh, what they, but the hive itself isn't really sustainable. It's going to last X amount of years and go into a landfill and it's never going to break down. So I think there's some other solution in there that I'm going to tinker around with to come up with a way um, that I can not spend an arm and a leg and keep my bees warm. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll be able to compost them when they wear out 10 years from now.
Mhm.
That's a good idea. Well, thanks again, everybody. The next, Tim gave us some great tips on overwintering in extreme climates, and then we're going to have I think our next conference will be on overwintering colonies in desert climates. And then the next mini conference after that. Randy's from your area. It's a couple of grad students from the University of California out of Riverside. And they're going to talk about nosema and the research that they've been doing on nosema. So we're excited. We were on the phone with them a couple of days ago, and we're excited to have them present to us. And then as we start off the new year, Dr. Peck is going to be start our year off. And then we're in conversations right now with a couple of professors out of Oxford. They're working on some nutritional studies for bees, and we're anticipating them in February or March. So we've got some good stuff coming up. Thank you, everyone. And this will be posted to our website in a few days. And as you know, Tim, we're upgrading our website to a new platform, and it'll be ready to go here in a couple of months. So thank you. Great conversation tonight, everybody. Have a good evening.